6 words stopped me in that hallway. 6 words, spoken in my daughter's voice on the other side of a half-open glass door. I had been standing there holding a paper bag with her favorite lunch inside. Grilled chicken, no onions, extra lemon. And by the time she finished that sentence, my hands had gone numb enough that I almost dropped it. I want to tell you what those 6 words were, I will. But first you need to understand what it cost me to be standing in that hallway at all, because without that, you won't understand why it broke something in me to hear them. My name is Renata. I'm 58 years old, and for 26 of those years I raised a daughter named Ophelia, mostly on my own. Her father left when she was 4, and he left the way some men do, not with a fight, just a slow fade, fewer calls, fewer weekends, until one Christmas he simply didn't call at all. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it explains why Ophelia and I were never just mother and daughter. We were a 2-person team against everything. She was drawing dresses before she could spell the word dress. I still have a shoebox somewhere with crayon sketches of gowns on stick figure women, each one labeled in her careful 6-year-old handwriting. Winter coat for a queen, dress for dancing in the rain. Even then, she wasn't drawing clothes. She was drawing feelings she wanted people to have. Money was tight in a way that people who've never lived it don't fully understand. I worked as a claims adjuster for an insurance company. A job I neither loved nor hated, a job that simply paid. Nights I took freelance bookkeeping for 2 small businesses in town. Saturdays I cleaned houses for extra cash, and I never once let Ophelia see me do it, because I didn't want her carrying my exhaustion the way I'd carried my own mother's. When she got into design school, the acceptance letter came with a tuition number that made my stomach drop. I didn't tell her that. I sold my car and bought a used one. I took out a loan against my retirement that my financial advisor practically begged me not to take. I picked up 2 more bookkeeping clients, and when she called me crying with joy the day she got in, I told her, "Don't you worry about a thing. Just go be brilliant." She believed me. She should have. I meant it. 4 years of school, 4 years of me eating rice and beans more nights than I'd like to admit. 4 years of watching her portfolio grow into something that made her professors write things like rare instinct and commercial vision beyond her years in the margins of her work. I framed one of those notes. It's still on my hallway wall. After graduation, she didn't want a job at someone else's label. She wanted her own. And I understood that ambition the way only a mother who'd sacrificed everything for it could, because in some strange way, it had become my ambition too. I gave her the last of my savings, $11,000, to help her rent a small studio space and buy her first round of fabric. I told her it was a gift. She told me it was a loan and she'd pay every cent back with interest. I laughed and said I'd hold her to it. That was 3 years ago. Her label, Ophelia Vane, she'd dropped my surname and taken a version of her middle name for the brand, which stung more than I let on, had grown from that one studio into an actual office. 9 employees, a showroom, a write-up in a regional-style magazine with her photograph on the page, chin lifted, looking every bit like the woman I always told her she could become. I hadn't seen her in 5 weeks. Not because of any falling out, just life, the way it swallows time when you're not paying attention. She'd been slammed with a spring-line launch, and I'd been recovering from a minor knee surgery that kept me mostly housebound. We texted. We talked on the phone twice, both calls short. Both calls her rushing off to a meeting before we'd really said anything. But that Thursday, my knee finally felt strong enough to drive, and I woke up with an idea that felt at the time like the nicest thing I could do. I would surprise her at the office, bring her lunch, sit in her actual workspace for the first time. I'd never seen it in person, only in photos she'd sent, and just be there, the way I used to be there when she was small and drawing queens in crayon. I called ahead to one of her employees, a sweet young man named Desmond, who I'd met once at her old studio, and asked if it would be all right if I dropped by around 1. He laughed and said, "She'd love that, Ms. Renata. Come on by." I didn't tell Ophelia. I wanted it to be a surprise. I dressed carefully that morning, which now, looking back, feels almost embarrassing to admit. I wanted to look like a mother her daughter could be proud to have walked through the office. I picked up her lunch order from the place she'd always loved since college. I drove 40 minutes with the container warm on the passenger seat, humming along to the radio. Feeling, as for the first time in months, genuinely light. The building sat on the edge of the arts district, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and enormous windows, the kind of place that looks expensive just standing outside it. A brass plaque by the door read Ophelia Vane Studios, and I stood in front of it for a full minute before going in, just looking at her name, her chosen name, etched into metal. Pride does something strange to the body. It makes your chest feel too small to hold what's inside it. The lobby was all white walls and clean lines, mannequins dressed in pieces from what I assumed was the new collection. Soft music playing from somewhere I couldn't locate. A young receptionist I didn't recognize glanced up, and I told her who I was, and her face did a small flicker of surprise before she smiled and said Ophelia's office was upstairs, second door past the sample room. I climbed the stairs slowly, favoring my knee, the paper bag crinkling with every step. The building had that hush that expensive, well-designed spaces have. Not silence exactly, but a kind of curated quiet, as if noise itself had been art-directed. I could hear the low hum of sewing machines somewhere below, someone laughing faintly down a hallway, the click of heels on polished concrete. I reached the second floor and saw her name again, this time on a frosted glass door half-cracked open. Voices drifted out. One of them was hers. I slowed down. Not out of suspicion. I want to be honest with you about that. I slowed down because I didn't want to interrupt a meeting, because for one more second, I wanted to just stand there and listen to my daughter's voice, filling a space she'd built with her own hands. I wanted to feel that pride a little longer before I had to share her attention with anyone else. That's when I heard the 6 words. She thinks this was her idea. I froze. Not because the words alone were damning. Out of context, they could have meant 100 harmless things. But it was the tone. It was the small, dismissive laugh that came right after it. The kind of laugh you give when you're describing someone slightly pathetic behind their back. I stayed still. One hand still holding the lunch bag, my body angled just enough to see a sliver of the room through the gap in the door. Ophelia was sitting on the edge of her desk, arms crossed, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, sharp blazer, the kind of posture that suggested money and confidence in equal measure. The 11 grand, the woman asked. The 11 grand, the studio space, all of it, Ophelia said. She thinks she's some kind of silent founder. It's actually kind of sweet in a sad way. The woman laughed. You're going to have to deal with that eventually, especially once the Castellan deal goes through. There's no version of the press release where my mom's rainy day fund is part of the founding story. I know. I've been thinking about how to handle it. Handle it how? There was a pause. I remember that pause more than almost anything else in this story, because in it, I felt something in my chest actually drop, like missing a stair in the dark. I was thinking I'd just say I self-funded through savings from freelance work in school, Ophelia said. It's not really a lie. I did have some freelance income. It's just a version of the truth that sounds better. And if she ever reads an interview and sees that, she won't. She doesn't read Fashion Weekly. She barely knows what LinkedIn is. They both laughed again. I want to tell you I did something dramatic in that moment. I want to tell you I pushed the door open and said something that changed the course of the conversation right then and there. I didn't. I stood in that hallway holding a bag of chicken with no onions and extra lemon, and I felt 26 years of sacrifice quietly rearrange themselves into something smaller and stranger in my chest. I stepped back from the door. Quietly. I walked back down the stairs the way I'd come up, past the mannequins, past the receptionist, who asked brightly if I'd found her okay, and I said something. I genuinely don't remember what. And I walked out to my car and sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes without turning the key. I want to be fair to her. So I sat there and I built every excuse I could construct, because that's what mothers do. We defend our children even from the evidence of our own ears. Maybe it was just office talk, the kind of exaggerated cynicism people perform for co-workers to seem tougher than they are. Maybe the $11,000 conversation was really about something else, and I was only catching the tail end. Maybe handle it meant something generous I hadn't heard the rest of. I drove home telling myself these things. I put the lunch in my own refrigerator, uneaten, and I didn't call her that night or the next. Not out of anger exactly, out of a need to know first. whether what I'd heard was really what I thought it was. 3 days later, I did something I'm not proud of, but I don't regret it either. I opened my old email account, the one I used when I wired her that $11,000 3 years ago, and I found the message. Subject line, for your studio. No rush on paying it back, just build something beautiful. Her reply 12 minutes later, I promise I'll pay every cent back with interest. This means everything, Mom. You're the reason any of this exists. I read that reply 4 times. Then I did something else. I searched her name alongside the word founder, alongside Fashion Weekly, alongside Castellan, which I now understood to be some kind of luxury retail partner she'd been courting. And I found an early interview from 8 months prior, a small trade publication, where a reporter had asked how she got started. Her answer quoted directly, I was incredibly lucky to have family support early on. My mother believed in me before anyone else did. And that belief is the entire reason Ophelia Vane exists. That answer had made me cry when she first sent it to me. Months ago, a screenshot with 3 heart emojis and the words, "This one's for you." Mom, I'd printed it out. It was in the same drawer as the Crayon Queens, so something had changed between that interview and the conversation I overheard. Something, or someone, had convinced her that the truth I'd been proud to be part of was now a liability to be managed. I thought about the woman in the blazer. I thought about the word Castellan, and I decided, quietly, that before I said a single word to my daughter, I needed to understand exactly what I was walking into. I went back to the building a week later, not sneaking this time, but not entirely announced either. I told Ophelia I wanted to take her to dinner to celebrate the new collection, and I asked if I could pick her up from the office instead of a restaurant so I could finally see the space properly. She agreed, sounding genuinely happy to hear from me, which somehow made everything worse. I arrived early. Desmond, the sweet young man from before, was at his desk near the entrance, and this time I sat with him for 20 minutes while I waited, making the kind of small talk that isn't really small talk at all. It's reconnaissance dressed as friendliness. Business must be good, I said. I heard something about a deal. Castellan? Desmond's face did something complicated. You know about that? A little. He lowered his voice. It's a big deal for us. Really big. Castellan wants to carry the line in 12 stores, starting next spring. But their whole brand story is built around discovered independent talent, no outside backing. Their marketing team has been very specific about that. No family loans, no angel investors, nothing that complicates the narrative. And if there had been a family loan, Desmond hesitated, and I watched him decide in real time how loyal to be to a boss who wasn't in the room. There's been some rewriting of the origin story lately. I don't love it, but it's not really my place. I thanked him and didn't push further. I had what I needed. My daughter wasn't ashamed of me in some abstract, thoughtless way. She was making a calculated decision to erase me from her own story, in writing to close a deal. And the woman in the blazer, I later learned, was a brand consultant named Priyanka Solis, hired specifically to clean up the founding narrative before the Castellan announcement. Ophelia came out of her office at 6, bright and warm, hugging me the way she always had, telling me how good it was to see me, how sorry she was we hadn't connected more lately, and I hugged her back and I smiled and I said nothing. Not yet. We went to a quiet Italian place she picked, the kind with candles in wine bottles and a waiter who clearly knew her. She talked animatedly through the appetizer about the Castellan deal, about how it could change everything for the brand, about the 12 stores, about the press rollout planned for next month. There's going to be a whole feature, she said, eyes bright. Fashion Weekly again, but bigger this time. A real profile. What's the angle? I asked, keeping my voice easy. Self-made designer builds a brand from nothing. Very clean story. Very marketable. She smiled, not noticing or not letting herself notice the specific weight I put on the word nothing. I set down my fork. Ophelia, I said, I came by the office last week, before the dinner tonight. I wanted to surprise you with lunch. Her smile faltered slightly, some instinct in her sensing where this was going before I said another word. I heard you talking to someone, a woman in a blazer, about the $11,000. The color left her face slowly. The way it does when someone realizes there's no version of the next sentence that ends well for them. Mom, I heard you say I think it was my own idea. I said, and my voice, to my own surprise, didn't shake. I heard you say you'd tell people you self-funded through freelance work. I heard you laugh. The restaurant noise continued around us. Glasses, laughter from another table, the clatter of a kitchen somewhere behind swinging doors. But at our table there was nothing. Just her face and mine, and 26 years sitting quietly between us like a third guest at the table who'd finally been noticed. "It's not what you think," she said first, which is, I've learned, almost always the opening line people use right before confirming exactly what you think. "Then tell me what it is," I said. She was quiet for a long moment, turning her water glass slowly by its stem. "Priyanka, the consultant, she said the Castellan deal is worth almost $400,000 in first-year revenue if it goes through clean. But their whole brand is built on this idea of discovering raw, unbacked talent. If it comes out that my mom wired me $11,000 to start this, they said it complicates the story too much. It makes us look less, I don't know, impressive, I guess. So the plan was to lie. The plan was to simplify," she said, and I watched her hear how weak that sounded, even as she said it. "Ophelia, I sold my car for you. I emptied my retirement account for you. I cleaned houses on Saturdays so you wouldn't know how close to the edge we were living, because I didn't want you carrying that weight while you were trying to build something beautiful. And now I'm a complication to simplify out of your story. That's not how I meant it." "Then how did you mean it?" "Because I heard you laugh, Ophelia. I heard you laugh about me thinking it was my own idea to help you. Like I was foolish for believing I mattered to any of this." Her eyes filled. "But I want to be honest with you. In that moment, I wasn't moved by her tears the way I might have been a year earlier. I'd spent 11 minutes in a parked car, giving her every benefit of the doubt I had. I'd spent a week doing quiet research, instead of confronting her in anger. I'd earned the right to hear her cry without immediately rushing to comfort her. I got scared," she finally said. "Priyanka kept saying the deal could fall apart over something this small, and I panicked. And I said something cruel because it was easier than saying I was scared. I know that's not an excuse. I know what it sounded like. I'm not going to pretend I didn't say it." "No," I said, "you're not." Here's where the story could have gone one of two easy ways. She could have kept defending herself until I walked out, or I could have forgiven her on the spot because she was crying and she was my daughter, and 26 years of love doesn't switch off because of one bad week. Neither of those things happened, not exactly. What happened was quieter and stranger, and took much longer than a single dinner to resolve. I told her I needed time. Not to punish her, though I understand if it felt that way to her, but because I genuinely didn't know in that moment how to be in a room with someone who'd rehearsed erasing me for financial convenience. I paid for my half of the meal, which she tried to stop me from doing, and I drove home in silence with the radio off for the first time in years. Over the following month, she called 4 times. I answered 2 of them. The conversations were short, careful, the kind where both people are choosing their words like they're walking across ice. She told me she'd gone back to Priyanka and refused the simplified origin story. She told me the Castellan team had pushed back hard, and for 2 weeks it genuinely looked like the deal might collapse over what Priyanka called narrative inconsistency. Then, 3 weeks after our dinner, Ophelia called me at 9 at night. Her voice different than I'd heard it in months, smaller. More like the 6-year-old with the crayons than the polished founder from the magazine photos. "I told them the truth," she said. "I told Castellan my mum gave me $11,000 because she believed in me before anyone else did. And if that's not a story they want to be part of, then I don't want to be part of their brand." What did they say? They said it was actually a better story than the one Priyanka wrote. Their head of marketing said, and I'm quoting her, "A daughter who tells the truth about her mother is worth more to us than a fake myth of solitary genius. The deal's still happening, Mum, with the real story in it, with you in it." I didn't say anything for a moment because I was crying quietly in my kitchen, holding the phone against my shoulder. The Fashion Weekly feature ran 2 months later. I have it framed now next to the professor's note and the Crayon Queens. The headline reads, "Ophelia Vane's Quiet Foundation, How One Mother's Faith Became a Fashion House." There's a photograph of the 2 of us in the office, her arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something the photographer said just before the shutter clicked. I won't pretend everything healed as cleanly as a magazine spread suggests. There are still moments when I remember that laugh in the hallway, that 6-word sentence. She thinks this was her idea, and something in me tightens for just a second before it lets go again. Trust, once you've heard it questioned like that, doesn't return in a single dinner or a single headline. It comes back in smaller pieces, in phone calls she now makes without me having to ask, in a company newsletter that lists founding support Renata Vale in the credits, without her needing to be told to put it there. She still owes me. Technically about $6,000 of that original 11, paid back slowly month by month, always with a note attached that says something small and specific. Thank you for believing this was possible. Thank you for the rice and beans years. Thank you for standing in that hallway long enough to hear the truth instead of walking away from it. I think about that hallway a lot. I think about how close I came to simply turning around, eating my own doubt, telling myself it was nothing, letting her build a story that didn't have me in it because it was easier than the conversation that followed. I think about how many mothers in that exact spot, holding that exact bag of lunch, might have done exactly that. I didn't. I stood there. I listened. I let it hurt exactly as much as it needed to hurt, and then I did the harder thing, which was to bring that hurt into the light instead of carrying it quietly for the rest of both our lives. If you're a parent listening to this, and you've ever wondered whether the sacrifices you make in the dark actually matter to the people you make them for, I can't promise you they'll always get the credit they deserve. But I can tell you this: sometimes the people you built everything for just need one honest conversation to remember exactly who helped them become who they are. And if you're the child in this story, the one who's ever been tempted to simplify someone out of your own success because their part in it felt inconvenient to explain, I hope you never have to learn what I watched my daughter learn. That the version of your story with the people who loved you first still in it isn't the complicated version. It's the true one, and it's always the better one to tell.